We're recording the interview of Curtis Kane. This interview is being conducted by David Morse and Katora Edwards from Wright State University's Veteran Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at Wright State University's The New Media Incubator in Dayton, Ohio. It is 11:16 a.m. on October 20th, 2017. All right, Curtis. Let's start off with when and where you were born.
I was born in Savannah, Georgia, May 1st, 1966.
Okay. Who are your parents?
My parents were Gerald and Flora Kane of Beaufort, South Carolina, and Dracut, Massachusetts.
What were their occupations?
My dad was a retired Marine and went into retail. My mother was in the insurance business and then the retail business, and owned a restaurant and a bar.
Did you have any siblings?
3.
Did any of them join the military?
Yes, my oldest brother Kevin and my oldest brother Bob. Bob joined the Navy, and my brother Kevin was in the Army.
How much influence did they have on you joining the military?
My brother Bob had a significant influence on me joining the Navy. We looked a lot alike, just a few years apart, obviously a bit older. He's about 14 years older. And I remember when he joined the Navy and I got to go visit him when he was stationed in Jacksonville, and he would come home and just, sort of my hero.
That's awesome. So before you joined the military, what were you doing?
Oh, messing around, not doing a whole lot, just going to high school, trying to figure things out. And went to high school in Beaufort, South Carolina. I dropped out when I was 17, messed around for the summer. An older relative took me in at 17, and I moved to North Carolina and finished high school with the focus of joining the Navy.
So did you join immediately after high school, or was there a period in between where you were working?
I worked full-time, finished high school, and joined the Navy while I was still in high school when I was 17. Joined the delayed entry program.
Oh, okay.
No job designation for the Navy. I just a non-designated airman, and was waiting to finish high school so I could go to boot camp.
Nice. Now, excuse me. Where did you end up joining? It was there in North Carolina that you joined?
Yes, I joined in Greensboro, North Carolina. The specific date was December 3rd, 1983, and I completed high school May of 1984. Reported to Charlotte, North Carolina Military Entrant Processing Entrant in military, the MEP Center in Charlotte, and July 9th of 1984, and flew to San Diego the next day. So July 10th is when I reported to Recruit Training Command in San Diego.
Okay, so tell me about your basic training.
Well, I'd never really been out of South Carolina much, or North Carolina. Just stayed pretty much isolated to that small area of the East Coast. So it was different. It wasn't like we were going out in town, we were stuck on base, but it was still different. And I had never been involved in anything like that, and wasn't real worldly, and met a lot of guys from a lot of different places, and it was more of a culture shock than anything like that. And Navy boot camp wasn't that hard. It was, it was more mind stuff, kids trying to figure each other out, and discipline, and learning a new way of thinking and behaving.
So, did you arrive by bus? No. So what was your first thoughts before boot camp, or like entering boot camp?
I don't know. I feel like I was fairly well prepared. We had a good recruiting command that we were active in. We did a lot of group activities. One thing I remember is we took a bus trip from Greensboro, North Carolina up to Norfolk to go tour a ship. And we got to meet a few other people, and the chief at the Recruit Training Command had a friend in Norfolk, obviously. So they took care of us, and we hung out, and we got a chance to stay at the barracks at Little Creek Navy Base for a night. And I feel like I was as prepared as I could be, but you're never fully prepared, especially if you were not if you've not been worldly and you're not cultured, and seeing a lot of people from a lot of different places, a lot of different faces for sure. And but yeah, I felt pretty well prepared. Now that I look back on it, 30 years, I guess, 33 years on it, I was probably just as conditioned and just as goofy as any other guy that showed up. Is what it is.
Okay, so when I went through boot camp, we had the last thing that we did before we can actually graduate was this ship that's been being attacked. Did you guys do anything like that back then?
We did. We had the USS Recruit, and funny story, that's the only thing left from Recruit Training Command in San Diego, because they obviously the base closed and it's all commercial and condos and all this, but the USS Recruit is still sitting there with the big number 1 on the hull. So yes, we did we used the MC1, and we did the fire drills and the attack drills and all that stuff. Yes.
So after boot camp, did you go to an A school or a C school?
I attended Airman Apprenticeship School in San Diego. We marched across the base, went across the bridge, and went over. I spent a month there learning about different tools and firefighting and the different aviation ratings. Mm-hmm. And it just prepared you to get to the ship, to not be prepared for where you were going, really, because you had a variety of places you could end up. And I ended up going to an aircraft carrier, USS America, and air department's 4 departments, and you can either work on the flight deck, the hangar deck, you can work on the arresting gear, you can handle the fuel, the equipment, just what have you. And so I went to the hangar bay division. That's where I was assigned. So I worked as an aircraft handler, an aircraft firefighter.
So what were the duties being in the hangar bay?
You cleaned and chipped and painted everything. You tied everything down. I caught it a unique time. I arrived in Norfolk like November 1984, and they were still at sea. They were on their way back in from a Mediterranean cruise that included an Indian Ocean segment of it, where they had spent, once they got there and told us, 100 straight days in the IO. So we were waiting for them to get back. And they got back, and we met the ship as it came in. We were part of the line handling party, and it was just pretty impressive seeing this big boat pull in, and the families were there, and everybody was festive, and the guys were coming. Everybody was happy. I just remember it being butt cold too, because I'd never been that cold in my life, and it was November, and we were preparing to go into the shipyards for a 6-month just kind of overhaul. So my introduction to the ship was nothing fancy. It was grunt work, 6-7 days a week, duty section, standing watches, being the new guy.
So is there like different divisions within the hangar bay? Because I know that it's like 3 or 4 areas in the hangar bay.
The USS America and the USS Kennedy were 2 conventional carriers developed after they did CV-65, mm-hmm. the Enterprise. They were built during the Vietnam War, and they were built as conventional. So they had the 2-bay system. Some of the bigger carriers have 3 aircraft handling bays, or 2 separate bays, and that's for a lot of different reasons. The biggest one is fire control. So they have a lot of planes, a lot of tight spots. They could cordon off areas and mitigate damage, fires, things like that. But we had 2 bays. Basically, the duties were, when you're in Port Norfolk, or you were in port somewhere, you went into 6 section duties, and you had a senior E6, and then an E5, and rest of the way on down, depending on what rank you were, where you were at in your career, depending on how you fell out in duty section. And you handled watch, you handled maintenance, you handled cleaning, that kind of stuff. Working parties. For those that are watching this that aren't familiar, if you see those old movies where guys are hauling in line and passing boxes and food and all that, yeah, that really happens. And we did stuff like that, fire drills. But at sea, you had aircraft handling crews, and your crew consisted of an aircraft director that was usually an E4 or a senior E3, depending on how many people you had. And then you had safety. Those guys were both yellow shirts. Then you had a tractor driver, and then you had aircraft handlers, which were the guys handling the chalking and chaining and things like that of securing the aircraft for movement.
So, okay. The next question is, when you did these fire drills, do they also try to shut down the bays?
It depended on what was going on with the drill, but yes, most often time, if you had a fire drill, you did everything you would in a real fire situation, from someone taking charge of the scene, guys grabbing extinguishers, bringing those, hoses, things like that. If there were weapons or simulated weapons areas, you'd make sure there was a team set up to go keep that cool, things like that. And yes, they would cut off the hangar bays. They would close the doors, just as it was. The thing with the military, regardless of the branch, the way you learn to train is you do as much as you can with simulating as little as possible. So if you're going to say, okay, I'm going to reach for this switch to do this, you're going to reach for that switch when you train, because in real life, if something's happening, you don't want to think about it. You want to just act and go. And if they don't want you pulling that switch, there's going to be somebody standing right there. Okay, don't pull the damn switch, or don't turn the hose on, or what have you. Mm-hmm. So you do everything as real as you can, and so you're prepared when something really happens.
So were you able to go up on the flight deck to see what was going on during flight operations?
I did. I'll be honest with you. The flight deck was a little intimidating to me at first, but I went there a few times and I got the hang of it. But I spent most of my time on the hangar bay when we're at sea, certainly at sea. We had our own duties.
I'm sorry, what was intimidating about the flight deck?
It was big. The airplanes were big. It was loud. A lot going on, and just to see that for the first time, it really is just something to see. It can take you back for a moment or two until you can get up there and get acclimated a little bit. And I had a flight deck experience on my second ship where I worked the flight deck, and it was a little, then you get it. Then once you do it for a while, it becomes like no big deal. But for the first time as an 18-year-old kid, wide-eyed, it's kind of, it's intimidating. A lot going on.
Any significant experience that happened in the hangar bay?
We had, I can't tell you there was a whole lot of excitement, because we really didn't have a whole lot going on. We worked a lot. We moved a lot of airplanes. We were at sea a bunch. We did a NATO cruise. We went to the North Atlantic. Or a med cruise, a lot of workups, things like that, training. We did have, going on our way to the med, when you're going into the med, you stop and I want to say it was Italy, somewhere in that area, where you stop for a day or two, whatever, and you take onboard replenishments. So we had these 46s bringing milk and all kinds of different things throughout the day. The last flight of the day, they're bringing one of the 46s. They're bringing milk. It's loaded with milk, and then all of a sudden we get the sound that there's a fire on the crash on the flight deck. Fire on the flight deck, and then when you have a fire on the flight deck, you automatically go to general quarters. So everybody manned their battle stations, went to wherever you're supposed to go. Well, apparently they messed up. Something happened with the calculation on the load, and we brought the 46 into the flight deck. He kind of ended up in the catwalk and tipped it over, and milk was everywhere, and you could see it down in the water. And he was banged up a little bit. He was fine. The fire was isolated, and the crash was isolated to where it was at. So that was excitement. We had a few aircraft mishaps while we were at sea during flight ops, and on our way back from the Mediterranean, we had a F-14. We had an A6. I hadn't thought about this in a while. We had an A6 have to ditch in the water. It was, I want to get this right because if somebody that knows me was back here, I don't think I'm BSing. I'll make sure I get this right. 46 went off the waste cats, and there was an issue, and the pilot punched out, and he was fine. They pulled him out of the water. He was no worse for the wear, just wet. And on our way back to Norfolk, as we were, the squadrons are loading pallets, getting ready to go back to their bases, F-14 crashed as well, lost one in the water, but both the pilot and the navigator were fine.
That's good. So was this the only ship you've ever been on?
No, I was on the USS Nassau. It was an LHA. There was a Gator, what we called a Gator freighter.
Yeah, they did commission while I was still in.
Yes. My first ship is now a artificial reef, and the Nassau is now decommissioned. But I worked V1 division there. I worked the flight deck. The unique thing with the LHA is we had the whole variety of Marine Corps helicopters, from the AH-1s, the Skid Hueys, to the 46s and the H-53s, but we also had the Harriers, and at the time we were the first ship to go on a full 6-month cruise with a complement of Harriers. And as well, we had the ground Marines. We could do the ballast deck, where we could bring the water into the well decks, so they could launch from the sea and from the air. So we had a ship's company on the America. Ship's company was like maybe 2,500 to 3,000. Then with your squadrons, you blew up to about 5,500 guys. On the Nassau, there were only 800 ship company, but when we took on the Marines, we ended up with like maybe 3,800 people, air wing and ground forces.
So what rank were you when you got stationed on the USS Nassau?
I went, oh, funny story. Oh, this is an interview, so it's got to be fun and truthful. I got to be a E4 twice. So I got promoted to E4 on the America, and then I reported to the Nassau as an E3, and then I was at ABH3 again on the Nassau, and I was at E4 when I got out in '89.
So you said you had an experience on the second ship. Would you like to talk about that?
Sure. We had a couple incidents on the ship. You know, the Harriers like to, catch fire from time to time in the engine for no good reason, and kind of handled it. We had, I want to be accurate, it would have been spring of '89. It was close to the time I was getting out. H-46 came in and was spot 4, and I was on the tractor. I was not the landing signalman for this go round. I was driving the tractor, and they were going to shut down. Then we were going to just back in, pull them off spot, and go park him. Well, they had some type of a rotor brake malfunction or something like that. Smoke started pouring out of the top. The pilots popped out of the each side of it onto the deck, and we had a fire. I had a chance to be there to be the on-scene leader, and the flight deck fire truck came in right away, put foam on it right away. It was no big deal, but we kind of handled business, and we had trained for it all the time. Everything just kind of seemed automatic. It was no more dramatic than that. There weren't pieces flying everywhere, and nothing like that. It just kind of fell into place. It was a culmination of training, because we do flight deck fire drills all the time, and everybody did what they were supposed to do. Everything was in place like it was supposed to be. It was just, it was kind of cool to see. And then we had some other smaller incidents, here and there. But other than that, that was probably about the biggest as far as a mishap goes. Other than that, it was pretty safe and
So can you
fun.
tell the difference between like the LHA and a CVN? I know the CVNs or carriers it's like an organized chaos, but I was never stationed on one. So can you describe it?
I can describe it perfectly. When you're on an aircraft carrier, everything revolves around air department operations. Everything. Everything's on a 12-hour schedule. So if you're on 12 on, 12 off, that's how you work. When you're at sea, it doesn't matter if you're at sea 10 days, 100 days, you're 12 on, 12 off. So everything revolves around that schedule. So there's constantly food. The chow halls are usually open 4 or 5 times a day. So if you go to bed, say you work days and you get off at 1900 and you go to the coop, everybody gets their showers or whatever, and then they got the shipboard TV programs are on, and then whatever movie was on that night, and then you went to bed. Well, when you got off, the guys that got off at 7 a.m., they got the same cycle. So at 0900, they're watching Weird Science or Terminator or whatever the heck the movie was at the time, So everything ran on that cycle, and it was just, every thing ran on a cycle. How And Air Wing, Airedales all got the attention. And the deck guys and the engineering guys really didn't like us a whole lot. Everybody knows the military culture. We get to the LHA, the Air Department guys are small. It's a deck department ship, it's an engineering ship, and man, they let us know all the time. So we didn't work on the 12 on 12 off schedule, we worked flight quarters to flight quarters. Meaning, if flight quarters started at 0600, you were probably up 05:15, make sure everything's tied down, FOD walk down, all that other stuff, and you worked. So say flight quarters were for 13 hours, that's at 1900, then you got another 30 minutes to an hour to do all the securing, and then back again whenever flight quarters started. So there was no, so watching out, you were it. And we were definitely not considered the most important on the ship. And one of the stories I like to tell, when the Marines came to the ship, they had their Air Wing Marines, and you got the ground Marines. Well, they didn't like each other, and the ground Marines thought, they were prima donnas and all that other stuff. So the joke was the Marine aviation guys and the Navy Air Wing aviation guys were outcasts all among ourselves. So we all got along and hung out and had a great time because everybody on the ship hated all of us, So it was just kind of fun. So we'd get overseas, we'd hang out, the pilots would hang out. It was just, wow. Some stories I probably shouldn't say on camera, but yeah, that was the biggest difference.
Can you explain FOD walk down?
Okay, foreign object damage is what it means. Aircraft, they work with, you've got propellers, you've got engines, and these jet engines have air intake. And if anything is light enough to get picked up by the vacuum, I'll just use the term vacuum, not really a vacuum, but that for what we're talking about, it'll bring it into the engine. And it can be damaging, it can be fatal to the aircraft, the pilot and the crew, and to the people around, depending on what flies in. So everything has to be tied down. Everything has to be tied down, secured. So what you do before flight quarters is everyone lines up across the entire width of the deck, whatever the deck is, whether it's the Nassau, the USS America, the Angle deck, wherever there's going to be aircraft, and you start from the bow of the ship and you walk aft. Everybody's arm in arm, and you're looking for loose items, debris, things like that on the decks. So that's what a FOD walk down is.
Okay, after the USS Nassau, you got out. Did you?
I did.
Go to school after that?
No, I grew up watching Emergency on Friday nights. I think it was the TV night it came on. Johnny Gage and Roy DeSoto. So I always knew I wanted to be a paramedic.
Mm-hmm.
So I got off active duty end of May '84, and I started working at the fire department the second week of June as an aircraft firefighter. And I spent the summer of '89 going through rookie school for structural firefighting and EMT. And then I worked in this civilian fire service, got into EMS part-time, became a paramedic eventually, liked EMS more, so went into EMS full-time, got into teaching quite a bit, was part of a regional critical incident stress debriefing team, got to do a lot of stuff as a civilian, but I knew I'd always miss the military. So that's what kind of got me back in to the service.
Okay, so you went back in as what rate?
I joined the South Carolina National Guard as a 91 Bravo. It was a 91 Bravo at the time, was a combat medic. And they brought me in as a medic through my civilian acquired skills. And a lot of the guys I worked with back home, they were all part of the National Guard. We need a doc, man, why don't you come on and join? I said, fine. Well, I like being back in the military. I really like being with the guys again. Hated the Army right away. But you were locked in for 3 years, and it's not like other branches of the service with their reserves. If you just, you want to tap out and leave your stuff at the door, that's fine. In the National Guard back in the day, the sheriff would come get you at your house and make you go to drill if you chose you didn't want to go. So it wasn't like I did it for a couple months and say, nah, guys, I think I want to take a pass. I spent my full 3 years in, and it was fine. I liked being around the guys. Didn't like the Army. I was a Navy guy. So I did my full thing. I got promoted to corporal, I'd say my 14th month or so. And I knew I wanted to stay in the military. I knew I wanted to be out of the National Guard. So I contacted the Navy right after I got out of the National Guard. And the recruiter, I was like, I want to go back in as an ABH. I do medical stuff on the outside. I want to go drill in Jacksonville, whatever. Well, we don't need ABHs in the reserves, but we need corpsmen in the reserves. So they brought me into the Navy as a corpsman. So my story to everyone is my early military career got me into my civilian career, and as my civilian career grew, it got me back into the military and into my next phase of my military career. So that's when I joined the Navy, May of May of 99. So 10 years after I left the ship, I reported to Charleston Navy Hospital as a reserve corpsman.
And what rate did they give you?
E5. I tested in E5.
So how was the duties of being in a hospital coming from a ship?
Let me answer the question this way.
Okay.
I had two things to adapt to. I hadn't been in the Navy in 10 years, and I can tell you the culture and things had changed so much. That was the thing that stuck out to me the most. I'd never really served with women, and now I'm in this reserve unit. On the ship, sometimes you're moving at the speed of sound. Well, in the reserves, you're moving at the speed of smell, so things don't go that fast. You're dealing with a different mindset, and it was a cultural adjustment for me. Once again, it was a cultural adjustment in 1984 when I went boot camp. It was a cultural adjustment in 1999 when I went back into the Navy, especially in the medical field. So I did a few drills, and I did my first annual training around the holidays of 1999, and I went to Jacksonville Navy Hospital, and I thought it was a frat party. It was crazy. It was just such a departure from what I remember the military being. Officers and the enlisted, and they hung out off. Anyway, I won't put that on camera either. It was just a culture shock. So it took me some time.
Any significance, any memories that stick out from the Navy hospital?
Oh, wow. Where do I start? Wow. I guess for some personal achievement, I was earned Sailor of the Year for our detachment, and I was up at the Reserve Center level as well. And that was my first personal achievement in the Navy Reserves. We got activated in 2003, and we were called up to National Navy Medical Center in Bethesda when they were staffing the Mercy and the Comfort, the Mercy or the Comfort, I can't remember which one. But they were staffing with personnel out of National Navy Medical Center, and as well, several of those members at the National Navy Medical Center had Fleet Marine Force platforms. So in case of war, you left National Navy Medical Center, you left Portsmouth Naval Hospital, and you went with 1st Marine Division, wherever. You were kind of pre-selected. So there was a vacancy at the hospital, so they called some reserves to come in to maintain the operation at National Navy Medical Center. Because aside from the typical group that you had to take care of at National Navy Medical Center, Bethesda's a big military town, they had war wounded coming in and coming back. So you had to have people there to continue on the care there. So that was a rewarding experience at the end. The beginning wasn't really fun. It was a different culture up there as well, another cultural adjustment. A lot of civilians up there. The civilians, they didn't adapt to the military culture. It was a flip. The military there somehow had to adjust and fit into the civilian culture, which ran absolutely against my grain. You know what I mean? So there were some challenges. The other thing with that experience, those civilian nurses had no idea how to deal with these families when they're Marines and their sailors were coming back wounded, and all the personal issues, all the other stuff, and they didn't do a good job of treating that. That sticks with me. That's one that I've had a hard time letting go of still, and it's been 15 years now, going into 15 years. They didn't treat the families well. They weren't prepared, so that's stuck in my head.
My next question would be, after that time, did you get stationed anywhere else?
Yes, I was attached to, Operational Health Support Unit, Jacksonville, Florida, out of Charleston, South Carolina, from 1999. Then after that mobilization, I spent another couple months, and then I moved to the Midwest and was attached in Cincinnati, Ohio, to EMF Great Lakes. It was, at the time, it was Occupational Health Support Unit, but it switched to EMF. So I was attached to Great Lakes Navy Hospital. And it would have been March of 2004, a representative from Navy Coastal Warfare Group out of Whiteman Air Force Base, Missouri. There was a mobile inshore and undersea warfare unit. And they were coming doing interviews because they needed personnel. And it was a commissioned unit, so there was funding available. If they needed people that didn't live close to Knob Noster, Missouri, which is west of Kansas, about 67 miles at Whiteman Air Force Base, they would pay for travel for you to come drill. So I got interviewed for a corpsman position, and in May they called me and said, hey, we want you to be a part of this. So I joined that program. And so from May, June 2004 until August of 2007, I was a part of mobile inshore undersea warfare, MIUWU 114, out of Whiteman Air Force Base, Missouri. I went to the Middle East with them. And yes.
How was the Middle East when you went?
Hot, dirty. Oh, wait a minute. There's two terms. Is it dusty or is it dirty? It was dusty most of the time, dirty a lot. It was boring. Honestly, we were in Kuwait. We did the Navy Coastal Warfare mission was port security. Okay, so the seaward point of embarkation for the war in Iraq was in Kuwait. Okay, so anything going into Iraq came through that seaward. So we were charged, the whole Navy Coastal Warfare group was charged with port security, the mobile inshore boat units, the smaller boats with the guns, things like that, do the patrols. You had your radar technicians, you had your electronic technicians, you had your cyber guys, you had your Navy CB guys running the equipment. The medical guys did readiness physicals, all that other stuff. We did some emergency medical care. We worked at the Troop Medical Clinic. I was a part of the command training team. I had been a part of the training team for the MU, and then when we merged all as a group, and we got our boat unit out of Texas, and then another boat unit out of California, and a part of another MU out of California. We all got together on this mission. There was like 350 of us, and I was a part of the command training team.
What were some of the challenges you faced out there?
Staying focused. It gets repetitive. The joke is it's Groundhog Day. Everything is the same, each day. Not being complacent. I learned about complacency on the ship. Doing the same things over and over. You get lax, and then things start happening. People start falling. People start hurting themselves. You have to start having negligent discharges with the weapons, that kind of thing. And staying focused and staying on an even keel was probably the hardest. I can't say we were ducking a lot of bullets, we weren't getting blown up. My joke is the biggest threat to most of those guys was the cholesterol, because the chow hall is open 5 times a day, and I knew for a fact everybody would go over and lose weight. We had guys went and gained weight. So just that kind of thing. So staying focused and feeling relevant too, because if you're not, you see the guys coming in, see the Marines coming in, the Army, they're all coming in, they're going to the war, and sometimes you can feel like, I'm not doing anything important. Everybody's got a mission. You don't always pick the mission picks you. And that was our mission, and there were never any issues with infiltrating the security. The seaport stayed open, and that wasn't just for war traffic, that was for oil traffic, for commerce, that was for other trade throughout the world. Kuwait is a huge trade partner with hundreds of countries, and a large part of the world's oil supply came through those waters. That was part of the Navy coastal warfare mission as well. There were never any issues at all. And besides a few mishaps here and there, and it was a pretty safe deployment and very rewarding, and I was proud to have served.
Okay, so were you E6 by this time?
I got promoted to HM1 while I was on that deployment.
Okay, this is like a personal question. I've always wondered this when I served. I know there's an initiation to become a chief, and in the Navy they do all this training or something. Can you describe that?
Well, first I can. It's a secret. I would have
No.
to kill you. You're on camera. But anyway, we can get that in a moment. I got promoted to first class during that deployment, and then I came back to the Midwest, and I attached to the Reserve Center in Louisville, Kentucky. And first time I was eligible for E7, the way the Navy does it, the Navy's the only branch of the service that tests for each of their ranks up to the rank of E7. You take a written test. You compete against people within your job rating twice a year. Now the E7 exam, the Chief's exam, is given once a year, and that's in the spring. So I took the exam spring of 2010. I was notified that I was board eligible based on the results of my exam, which means once you're board eligible, everybody that scores high enough to be board eligible goes up to a thing, goes to Millington, and you have a room full of master chiefs and captains. Those master chiefs are all rate specific. So I was a corpsman, so every HM1 in the Navy that made board, their packages went up to this big group in Millington, and they look at your record, and you get a thumb up or a thumb down. And I got selected my first time up. So I got the phone call, I can't remember, 22nd, 23rd of July. It was in July. I do know the month of 2010. And we started Chiefs leadership training. And we performed all summer. It's the way to describe it, it's a reprogramming once again of how to think and how to handle yourself, because it's almost a second trip through boot camp or recruit training, because you got to have a different mindset. And the Navy places a lot, every branch of the service places a good amount of focus on their senior enlisted leadership. The Navy just has a different way of doing it. And they place a lot of pride on it. There's a lot of tradition. Now there's so much good leadership training that comes with it. It is really a special process. And it's an honor to be a part of it, because only 8 people, was it 8%? I won't get this wrong. Like 8%, 9% of all enlisted reach that level. And then as you go further up, a smaller percentage become senior chiefs, and even a smaller percentage become master chiefs. So it is something very unique, and was probably my career highlight.
Okay, my next question will be, how was the food different from when you were in E6 and below from the Chiefs?
Okay, I know what you're getting at. I never had a chance to serve at sea as a chief.
Oh.
Okay? I can tell you that it's a little different. Like when I'd go on orders, I'd go somewhere. I'd go to Jacksonville Navy Hospital, for example. There's a little area. Now we were all eating off out of the same areas, but you had your own area to sit in. You kind of hung together, And that's good military order. We can work well with different ranks, you work with the officers, but you also need to stay in your lane too. And there is certain good military order and discipline, and there's a lot to be said for staying in your groups, especially when things get tough and decisions have to get made and people got to do things they necessarily don't want to do. You know, you don't want to be in a position to where there's people questioning. So I think in a small way, just having those coordinated areas, you know, kind of kept things, you know, in order. But I remember being on the ship. You know, the chiefs had their own mess, and they had their own food. They had their own mess cranks, and they would come in, and their mess cranks would come in and get the freshest bread. You know, the crew didn't get the freshest bread all the time because the wardroom and the chiefs were getting it, and their mess cranks were sucking up to them a little bit. So they knew where to get the hottest and the freshest, that kind of stuff. They had their own mess. They could go 24 hours a day. They had microwaves and all that other stuff. But rank has its privileges, you know. That's the one thing I wish I could have gotten to do, is gone to a ship as a chief. Because any Navy chief will tell you, any officer will tell you, there's no better position on the ship than the chief.
Did you try to go up for the senior chief, or did you retire after that?
As soon as I pinned, I was pinned on the 18th of September. It's usually the 16th throughout the Navy, but they did it on they did it on the 18th so families could be a part of the drill weekend. 2 weeks later, I got called by the reserve saying I was going to Afghanistan. So this, and I am answering your question. This is going to give you your answer. So, you know, I went on these orders and was assigned to the NATO Role 3 hospital in Kandahar and did 6 months there, and really thought about it. I said, you know, I want to get back home. I'm going to maximize my opportunities. I knew with the amount of time I had left, I would have 2 shots at it. You know, either get promoted or have to retire. Navy has high year tenure. But I got home and I worked hard at it for 6 months. So I would say around late in 2012 and around the holidays of 2012, I said, my wife at the time and I were talking, I said, I'm ready to come off the gas, I'm ready to be done. I'm just ready to be done. I want to wait to do the rest of my time, and I'm satisfied where I'm at. You know, it'd been long, 20 some years, and you know, I was a little bit older than some of the guys, and it was just time. You know, that last deployment kind of did it for me. I was satisfied. Didn't feel I needed to prove anything else. Was very proud of. I met my career goal of becoming a chief, and I was satisfied. I was satisfied.
So, how was Afghanistan?
Afghanistan, well, the base in Kandahar was huge, and at one time there were like 50,000 people there between different branches of the United States military, NATO military, contractors. I don't know if you've heard of it. Have you ever heard the term the boardwalk?
No.
Kandahar. It was a section in the middle of the base. There was some commercial shopping, and it was all fronted by a boardwalk. And within this boardwalk was like a walking track, and there was an open area. You could do physical activities. There was a volleyball court. The Canadians put up a hockey thing for you know in their tennis shoes. When you get no damn ice in Afghanistan. But anyway, point being, it was a place where everybody hung out. But it was very scary and intimidating. It was like the Wild Wild West, because you just saw a lot of shady people walking around. And the thing with Afghanistan was, how do I describe it? We were on a base, and I felt pretty secure. I felt pretty safe. Your concern is about something happening while you're doing your daily duties, or doing somewhere out on the base, or out training, or out at the chow hall, or what have you, having something happening there, and then we'd get rocketed. And this is just indirect fire, just lobbing over the fence, just seeing what they could hit. And we talked about this at our reunion earlier this year, this summer. The longer we stayed there, the more accurate it seemed like this indirect fire was, and the more people that were getting injured with this indirect fire. So it was 4 days left before we were going to leave, and there was this one section of the boardwalk right near the NATO section where we stayed, and there was a green beans coffee. Anybody that's been deployed knows what green beans coffee is, and the barber shop. Well, I had spent countless amount of hours certainly at the coffee place. Well, they sent an indirect fire, and the rocket landed right in front of the green beans and the barber shop. Didn't blow up, but it landed, came through the little roof structure and hit the grate, and I'm like, it is really time for us to go. It's time to be done. But Afghanistan was a lifetime of memories, almost all of them good, some of them not so good. The seasons of 2010 and 2011 when I was there were the two busiest as far as casualties and death during the entire conflict in Afghanistan. And I was there for the fighting season, so we got the brunt of that. But it was rewarding, lifetime friendships. I learned so much, learned about myself, learned about other people. I learned that there are so many good, bright young people in the military. We're just fine. Don't listen to the news. Okay?
What was your role out there?
My assignment was senior enlisted leader for the Directorate of Nursing, the chief nurse officer of the hospital, Captain Maureen Pennington. So handling the enlisted within the clinics, the ICU, the intermediate care clinic, things like that. I was a part of ad hoc trauma, was my second most primary job, meaning we had to assign trauma teams. You had a doctor, I think it was 2 or 3 nurses, and 2 or 3 corpsmen, and that was a trauma team. One trauma team stayed in the hospital 24 hours a day. Another trauma team stayed, I think it was 10, 12 hours, and then the other 2 trauma teams were on call. Everybody had pagers. And then if we had casualties come in, you would get called. So if it was one or 2, the trauma team at the hospital there would handle one. Then you had people in the intermediate care areas. I can't remember the name of it. The primary care area, where people came in for regular routine stuff. You had people there, but when you had 3 casualties or 4 casualties, things like that, you had to have you need an ad hoc trauma team till either the other teams get there, or if there's more casualties than the trauma teams have, you've got ad hoc trauma teams. So with my background in emergency medicine, it was sort of a natural fit. And I did a lot of ad hoc trauma team work. And I would go in from time to time, even with 1 or 2 alphas, and jump in when I needed to. I was one of the things I did while I was over there, I set up an ALS and an ACLS and a PALS, which is Advanced Cardiac Life Support, and Pediatric Advanced Life Support Training programs. The one thing that no one was prepared for was how many children we would be seeing. It was just and they knew it, but it was like we didn't really prepare. I was prepared for it because I've dealt with kids in my civilian role, and I've been taught for 20 years with the Heart Association teaching the program at various hospitals and pediatric hospitals, things like that. So it was sort of my comfort zone. And so seeing all the kids was a challenge for most people. And obviously, we had children that were injured, but we had sick kids too, all kinds of weird stuff going on. Afghanistan is a third world country. So another part of my role there was training. And it really was a benefit, and it was rewarding. It kind of fit into, it was one of those things I figured out I needed to do. It wasn't like, say, okay, yeah, by the way, we heard you teach these classes, you're going to do that here. I've kind of figured it out on my own and kind of carved my own niche to do that. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did.
Okay, I get rambly sometimes.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
One other thing I did get to do. there was a forward operations base, and they had a Roll 2 forward surgical team. So word had gotten out that we were doing these CPR trainings, ACLS, these PALS trainings. So it was Tarankout. That's where it was at, Tarankout, Afghanistan. It was where camp, I don't want to say the name of the base. It was a special operations base, also some Aussies, Singaporeans, things like that. So they heard we had a PALS program. They'd been seeing a lot of kids. So they asked if we could come out and teach. So grabbed a nurse that had been part of the program, and our mannequins, all that. We jumped on a Chinook. I guess that's what the Army calls them, the 46s, 47, dual props, whatever they are. And so off we go. So my vacation for 4th of July, 2011, was I got to go to a different base, and we got to teach PALS, Pediatric Advanced Life Support, to Singaporeans, Australians, Brits, American doctors, nurses, care providers, things like that. And got a chance to do that. That was pretty cool. Best food I had the whole time there. The Aussies ran the chow. It was amazing. It was summertime though, and they had the weight room was in this like aircraft hangar type thing up in an elevated area. So by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the weights were too hot to touch. You couldn't work out, so you had to work out at night or wear gloves. That's the other thing I remember. And Vegemite. I'd heard of have you ever heard of Vegemite? Okay. Anyway, it's something the Aussies put on everything. It's like Aussie mayonnaise. It's brown, and so it's laid out all over the chow. I tried it. It's some type of a meat substance. I don't know what the hell it is, but anyway, it's their mayonnaise.
Okay, so after Afghanistan, you said you retired, right?
I came back home in 2011, and I stayed in the reserves until March of 2014, and I retired.
So what did you do in those 3 years before you retired? Just United States?
Yes, I did drills, I did trainings, I did my ATs. We did a couple of chief training seasons. There were 3 chief training seasons I got to be a part of while I was still in. And stayed close to home. No more deployments. I'd already done what I needed to do. And retired.
So did you have a big celebration once you retired, or just kept it quiet?
Best question. Best question. The plan was to have a retirement party and a ceremony. I thought about it and I thought about it. And a couple months out, I said, I really don't want a big fancy. I didn't want a ceremony. I just wanted a party. So I said, what I want to do is for the reserves people don't understand what the reserves have to do. Reserves have to do a lot of stuff in a weekend. It's so mission focused, so many requirements and things you have to get done and all this. And for senior enlisted leaders and some of the officers, you do more work off of drill weekend than you do on drill weekend, because things happen throughout the month that can't wait for drill weekend to handle. And I'm sliding off a little bit, but to give you an example, we got a call in the middle of the month that one of our junior sailors was in a men's homeless shelter. So that one can't wait for a drill weekend. He'll be fine for another 3 weeks till we drill. You got to handle that right then. You know what I mean? Another thing, one of my sailors was home on R&R from Afghanistan. He developed a medical problem that he had to get helicoptered to a hospital for. So we had to handle that. I couldn't wait till drill weekend. Someone forward had to get called, but make sure his family was taken care of, make sure they knew he wasn't coming back to Afghanistan, just a lot of stuff. So to put into context what goes on at drill weekend, you finally have everybody in-house. You got to meet all these requirements. And the military's got their BS stuff too, stuff I don't miss. Doing the same thing you did every month just to meet another requirement. So it's very busy. So my thought was to throw a ceremony in. People are going to be busy. A lot of times at a lot of these ceremonies, the guys are just because they got to be there and they're looking at the watch. Okay, I got something else to do. Doesn't mean that they don't respect what's going on. It's just, They got a month's worth of stuff to do in 2 days. And I said, I just don't want to do that. So I said, what we'll do, we'll have a Chiefs lunch on Saturday, and then we'll have a party Saturday night. Whoever shows up, shows up. And that was it. So it was no big deal.
So what did you do after that? Once you retired, what was your next step from there?
Only having one job. Yeah. I got into critical care in 2013. I took time off from paramedicine. I left the hospital. I wasn't doing any EMS. I was just teaching. And I just, what do I want to do? What do I want to do? So I did a couple BS jobs through the holidays, and it felt cool not having any real responsibility. The bills are starting to add up, and I got to be a grown up. And I just reached out, and there was an opportunity in Dayton for a very reputable health organization that did critical care transport, air and ground, and applied for a ground position, and it's been a great decision. I'm still doing it. I enjoy it very much. It's rewarding, and so yes, that's what I've been doing, and I only have one job.
It's got to feel good.
It does.
So kind of reflecting back on your military service, you still stay in touch with any of the fellow sailors or anybody that you deployed with, anybody from your
Yes.
past military experience?
Yes. There are a few of the chiefs I stay in touch with. The guys that I gravitate to are the guys I was on the ship with. Not my most recent experience, the furthest back. Ben Jones, you wouldn't know him, that's just how I tell a story. We hooked up on Facebook yesterday. He was on the ship in 1986. Hadn't seen him since then. I saw his face and said, holy hell, that's Ben Jones. He don't look no different, except he's fatter and got gray hair, But point being is, we all stay in touch. The guys when we were young. Those are the guys that I see that tend to reconnect. I see it with Vietnam veterans. I know some of my relatives, they gravitate, it just takes you back. Those are your formidable years. So those are your best memories. I have great memories being a chief. I was proud being a chief. I would never, it's probably my biggest professional accomplishment in the Navy. But man, that time on the ship was the best. Sucks when you're doing it, then you look back on it, and you're like, man, I was dumb.
Sure.
So yeah.
Are you part of any veteran organizations?
I am a member of the VFW. I'm also a member of the American Legion. I'm attending Wright State University. I'm part of the Veterans Center here. Interesting, I've ran into some Navy chiefs. All of us are old, all of us are going to school. So I met another one, I met a female Tuesday. And she says, we need a Chiefs organization here. We need a Chiefs association. Because you get the Chiefs together, we're going to form a mess. She knows that. And so that's in my brain, but right now I'm going to school. I don't want anything. I'm not looking for any extra work right now. But yeah, it's been good seeing some Chiefs. And
What are you going to school for?
I am in the Wright State's military medic / corpsman to Bachelor's of Science nursing program.
And are you a freshman?
I am a
sophomore?
freshman.
Oh. So how's that going? Is there like a process for you to get into nursing, or they just let you not take it since of your background?
Okay, how this works, I'm doing the prerequisites right now, where the military component, prior experience component comes once you get into the nursing program itself. And there are certain nursing classes and courses and clinicals that I will not have to take based on my Navy experience. So that's where I don't want to call it an accelerated program. I think accelerated makes it sound almost like it's going to be fast food. Does that make sense? what's going to happen is once the prerequisites are met and I'm into the nursing side of it, then okay, this is where your military training. You don't have to take this. You don't have to take this because it'll be a waste of your time. You've done it. You've done it. You've done it.
That's good. So, moving on, just kind of, we're wrapping up here. Looking back through this whole experience, you've been in the Navy, you've had several jobs in the Navy, you've been in the Army, you've worked with the Air Force. What are some of the differences that you've seen throughout the branches?
Wow. I'm not going to have to fight my way out of the Veterans Center tonight, am I?
No.
Let me qualify first of what we all have in common.
Sure.
Okay? We're all patriots. We all love our country. I think almost everyone's in it for the right reason. And we give each other trash, but we all hang out and mingle just fine. But there are some cultural differences. It's cultural. Okay? It's cultural. The Marines, they are disciplined. You know, they're in a, in a proverbial glass that says break in case of war, and just get the hell out of the way when the glass breaks, okay? All right? They're very disciplined, very structure-oriented, very, very mindful and respectful of seniors, whether it's enlisted and their officers. The Navy has a similar structure with that. The Navy has so many occupations, so many different occupations, that, I think it's a little bit, depending on the occupation, you get a different subculture. I think that's a safe way to do it. And the same way with the Air Force. Working with the Air Force, I found the Air Force to be very, they have a modern way, a more modern, millennial approach to their personnel and how they do things, because it's the newest branch of the service. The Army, Navy, and the Marine Corps, we've been around since the 1700s. The Air Force happened after World War II. So the people that put that playbook together for that branch of the military, they had a more modern-ish approach to things. The Air Force does a better job of taking care of their airmen's families. Their deployments are shorter. Their accommodations are better as far as they do I tell you what, they have a more modern human resources approach. Does that make sense? Of how they do their business. The Navy joke is, like I just got to tell you, is the whole Air Force salute. I mean, do you guys spend like 5 minutes on it? That's one thing I didn't figure out. And your officers put their hands in their pockets at my hospital, and I just want to pull them aside and tell them to stop, but I can't. The Army's the oldest branch. They get beat up the most. Their sub-specialties, like their specialty is, if you do this thing specifically, those guys are wired tight, and they're good to go. One thing that I saw that the Army took a hit on, I wish someone would have seen coming, was when they lowered the standards, when they were trying to fill uniforms, when they had the recruiting shortage with this war, and they had to let people in that shouldn't have been in. And I know it's out of necessity, I'm not judging, but you did ask me a straightforward question, and she'll tell you, ask the chief a question, he's going to give you the answer, whether you like it or not. And I saw some things in Afghanistan, some of the regular Army, lower enlisted doing especially, that I would never see anyone in any other branch of the military do. But the Army has a long history. I met some great patriots in all different uniforms. It was an honor to serve with everyone. And I think it's important that we all train together. All the medics get trained together now instead of having 4 different. It's more integrated, and I think it's the right approach.
Did you find similarities? You mentioned while you were deployed, you worked with the UN and different countries and their militaries. Did you find some similarities in that
yes.
as well?
We're all the same people, whether we wear different uniforms, speak a different language, our skin color is different. People join the military wherever they're from, mostly I say for the right reasons. And you put those type of people together, they march different, like the Canadians. I don't know who the hell taught them to march and the high stepping and all this other stuff and whatever. It's just what somebody showed them that a couple hundred years ago. They're still doing that. I didn't figure that one out. But other than that, they were great to serve with. The Brits, fantastic to serve with. They had a great setup over in Afghanistan. They had their area well set up, took very good care of their patriots. Canadians took very good care of their patriots. Differences, aside from the way they look and the marching stuff and other stuff, the way they kind of, other than that, there are no real significant differences. And especially in the healthcare setting, everyone over there was the best of the best. Whether they spoke French, whether they spoke Creole, Louisiana, or anything in between, it didn't matter. We had with the Dutch, for example, everyone that was over there was just so good at what they did. That was everybody's connection. Does that make any sense at all? Yeah. So there weren't any real differences, I don't think.
So I know you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'll see if you can elaborate a little more. Your entire military experience, what about that has helped you now that you've retired? How has it helped you in your own personal life?
Wow. I could give you the corporate answer. Well, it's given me a good foundation. I learned discipline. I learned how to be on time. I learned how to wash my clothes and iron and all that other great stuff. Fine. Okay, gimme. It's a way of handling yourself and way you handle your business. My personal life's not always been the best, but my professional life is stayed pretty well, pretty tight over 30 years now. I would say this. We are different. We are different. Regardless of what branch of the service you were in, we are a different bunch. You learn early on, and we're caught in those impressionable years, and for most of us anyway, it's stuff that sticks for a lifetime. Little things like accountability. I have a strong sense of accountability professionally. I remember a chief telling me, if you go out in town and I'm not going to use the language, and get into trouble, I better hear it from you, and I better not hear it from anybody else. That sticks with me to this day. You guys gave my bosses that. Late punch or do something stupid on the time clock or whatever. I'll be the first one to own up because I'm so paranoid. Little things like that have stuck with me. Being on time, being dependable, understanding that just because you're late, you're not the one that's affected. Everyone else around you is affected. Patriotism. It reinforced my patriotism. And I look back on all my times and everything. And when I was 18, 19, 20, I knew I was on the ship, I was traveling, whatever. And I loved my country and I wanted to serve my country. But now, as an older person, and having the opportunity and the honor to serve, with patriots, and seeing many folks not make it home, and the whole thing of being in the military, being in conflict, and what it all means, it's given me a level of patriotism. I don't think I would have ever had I not had the honor to serve.
That's awesome. Do you have anything?
Is there any message would you like to leave for future generations?
Wow. Yeah, if you're 18 years old, I don't care if you're rich or poor, you should take 4 years and give it to your country.
It's very direct, like a chief.
I know. Felt like I haven't left the ship.
All right.
Is there anything else you would like to add?
No, I think that's good.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Curtis, for your story, and thank you for your service.
Thank you. That was good.